What is your idea of spirituality? Like how, I mean, what do you do to be? It's highly spiritual. That's how it just resonates that way.
I think it comes from my early education. When I look back to when I was 5 years old and I went to Catholic school, I was in the first grade and I was very young and very tiny. And so we'd have to go to the Sunday Mass, 9:15 Mass,
Yeah.
every week. And the thing was, the older students, the eighth graders, who were now like teenagers, they would sit in the front near the pulpit, and the
Yeah.
younger students sat in the back of the church. And I happened to be under the choir loft, and it was really dark there, and you couldn't see anything in
Oh,
front of you
yeah.
except you could hear the voice of the preacher. And so one day, I heard the preacher, well, he was telling these wonderful stories. I had no idea they were in the Bible. I just thought they were great stories, and I'd listen. And one day he said, God is light. He's everywhere, right? So the only thing I could communicate with was the chandelier that I could see from the pew.
Yeah.
So I used to pray to the chandelier when I was 5 years old,
Yes.
and I had that idea of spirit. But I since I was brought up in this way, I was very connected. And one of the
Yeah.
things is the name that my mother gave me. My mother was converted to Catholicism when she was about 10 years old. And she worked very hard to send me to Catholic school. She was a waitress, and sometimes she would just, people would just throw pennies at her for her tips.
Mm.
But
Yeah.
she was resolved to send us to elementary school, to Catholic school. And so I, I valued that much more later on in my life. But she told me before she died one time, she was in a hospital. She had just had surgery on her femur that was fractured, and she had a titanium rod put in her leg. And a couple of days later, she was sitting in the chair near the bed. She wasn't eating very much. And I said, Mom, let me sit you here and I'll feed you. I am a nurse and I'm experienced with this. And so she wasn't even opening her eyes. She was opening her mouth, and I was putting
Huh.
some soft food into her mouth. But all of a sudden, she opened her eyes and she looked at me and she said, now I know why I named you Christine.
Yeah.
And I was just so surprised to hear that from my mother. That's the first time she ever told me that, because my name means follower of Christ. That's the name that she
Ah,
gave me.
yeah.
And I always knew that. I used to go to church and pray, and that was always part of me, even though it wasn't mentioned by my mother. Because when I was named, my grandmother said, what kind of crazy name is that? Christine, right? But then my mother said, well, her middle name is May. I'm naming her after you. And then it was okay with her. But I valued that because during my work as a nurse, even as a young nurse, I recognized spirit. For example, when I was 16, as I mentioned, I went to nursing school. And that year, the job of student nurses was to clean up the people who had passed away
Oh,
and put
wow.
them in the shroud and put a little toe tag on the person. And so I was doing this with my classmates for the first time, and you
Wow.
needed assistance because the people were very heavy. They were dead weight, literally. So you couldn't move them. So I
Wow.
asked for this assistance from two of my classmates, but they were giggling the whole time we were doing this. And I told them, the person's spirit is here, you know,
Mm.
and so you have to consider that. So let's be respectful here. So that was when I was fairly young, and so I learned how to work with death and dying because I was a nursing student, and of course, after I graduated at the age of 19, I was in charge of a hospital unit, a 38-bed hospital unit, by the age of 22. So I had to manage a whole floor of mainly older citizens who were bound to die because they
Right.
they were they were in their 90s. And so always I wanted to be there and be with their spirit when they were going through that process of moving into the next world. So I was always aware of that, and I think it's just a natural thing for me, um, since I was very young.
Right.